Hello, and welcome back to the Point Left podcast with your hosts,
Skyler
and Kaylynne. Oh, that was so weak. There we go.
I was like, what, you want to gracefully hold hands? We just hold hands the whole episode.
Hey.
No, I talk with my hands too much. Hey, queens. So I'm trying to figure out how to segue into this. Professor Skyler is back. So if you wanted funny, it's not.
It's not going to be this one.
I mean, I can try my best to hold levity, but there are a few things that make me angry. And I would consider myself to be a pretty happy person, you know, pretty laid back person. At most, I get annoyed. It takes a lot for me to like be mad and furious. But one of the things that really grinds my gears is thinking about the AIDS crisis in the United States in the 1980s. Just because, and that's what this podcast is going to be about a little bit. No, this is going to be like the world's saddest segue, but I feel like every year or every couple of months, there is an event that hurts globally. It's a crisis or a war or an escalation of some kind. It's enough where I go, this is serious enough that I want to throw in the towel. I'm giving up. I'm going to die. But I think it's always a good reminder to remind ourselves of events in the past that were also crises, emergencies, and that people not only survived them, but made something come out of it, so it wasn't a complete and utter waste. Mm-hmm. And one of those things is art, and art that came about during the AIDS crisis. So I guess before we start, and again, if you ever want to jump in and interrupt me and ask for clarification, I answer the best I can. So, what do you know of like the AIDS crisis? What happened? Why did it get so bad? Aside from the fact that AIDS is just highly contagious.
I mean, honestly, I'm very uneducated.
Okay.
But I'm going to take a guess, and I'm assuming it's because our society hated gay people and they didn't take crises that predominantly affected gay individuals seriously, and therefore didn't offer treatment. Is that kind of?
You are right on the money.
Yeah.
Look at her. So a lot of this info, there's going to be like 1,000 sources. Mm-hmm. And one of those sources, because one of the most famous pieces of art surrounding the AIDS crisis is Rent. Like it or not. And so I do have a video talking about like really why I don't like Rent. But, and I'll get into that later. But there's a video by one of my favorite YouTubers, Lindsay Ellis, and I'm going to be stealing a lot of like her info for this the beginning half, because she really breaks down like the timeline of everything and what went down, because I feel like the context of the AIDS crisis and how we got here is just as important to the conversation of why art made during the AIDS crisis gives it the identity that it has. All right. Laugh when you can, everyone. You're going to hear my voice get angry. So the first cases of AIDS in the United States were reported in 1981. By 1983, there were over 1,000 reported cases in the U.S., and by that point, already half had proven fatal. And part of the slowed government response was because of the epidemic curve of the HIV virus, and that it was slow moving. And because it's easier for epidemiologists to encourage people to take action when it's like here's the disease, you get it, and you die within 24 hours unless you do X, Y, Z. AIDS isn't like that. AIDS was often referred to as the invisible killer, since someone infected with AIDS could have it for weeks, months, years, and have no idea. They could then pass on to the next person, and the next person, they could be patient zero and have literally no clue that their immune system was just self-destructing. Mm-hmm. Literally no clue. And AIDS itself is kind of a secret killer because people don't technically die from AIDS. They die from complications brought about by AIDS. Mm-hmm. So people die from like pneumonia.
Because it just like destroys your immune system, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
pneumonia or diseases that like 18th century peasants would get or
Yeah.
babies would get, things that typically your immune system can fight off like it's nothing, but AIDS cripples your immune system to the point that one sneeze knocks you out. And usually the kiss of death for AIDS in this time period was red or purple lesions on the face or body that just appeared one day. Again, a very common symptom of the disease's progression. By the time you saw lesions, the disease had spread to the point of no return, and you were probably going to die. If it's giving zombie vibes, it should, and already terrifying. Mm-hmm. So you have that as a factor as to why this crisis went on for so long, right? Like, it was hard to get people to change their patterns of life for a slow disease. Be like, there's a disease that's really deadly, and it could affect you 5 years from now. Like, unless it's an in-your-face, like, you get it and you die instantly unless you do these things, it's hard to encourage, like, you changing and, you know, change your life patterns for, like, a giant population like we have in the United States. But the government also had a delayed response to the AIDS pandemic purposefully. AIDS needed research because it was one of those diseases that was so fast evolving and needed to be studied. It needed research. And without proper funding for research and for cures, misinformation was rampant. You can't fight a disease with no research, no funding, no resources. So why was the administration under President Ronald Reagan so interested in blocking AIDS relief? Exactly like you said. So the original victims of AIDS just so happened to be gay men, dying of those random diseases I was talking about, like pneumonia, things that no one had died from for ages. And like these healthy men who were like at the prime of their lives, who didn't smoke, who worked out, were just dropping dead in their late 20s and 30s, seemingly for no reason. And what they ended up discovering was that AIDS is transferred through blood, semen, vaginal fluid, anal mucus, and breast milk, which makes unprotected sex and sharing needles the largest risk factors for contracting it. But they didn't know that for ages. They just noticed that gay people and poor people from urban centers like New York, LA, and San Francisco just kept dying of this strange disease, so it got nicknamed the gay disease or the gay plague. The New York Times literally called the disease GRID, or gay-related immune deficiency, in May of 1982.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
So it was called GRID for a long time before it was finally called HIV or AIDS.
Uh-huh.
And so when you think about it, right, like gay urban centers also housed a large homeless population. If you were trans or gender nonconforming or a drag queen, you were most likely getting kicked out of your house. You were getting disowned, living on the streets. And being homeless increased the risk factors for using unsterile needles, for drugs to ease your pain, or engaging in sex work, which is always a risk for contracting sexually transmitted diseases. So obviously, like, even being gay didn't make them get AIDS, obviously. There's no correlation between that. It just so happened to hit this community the harshest because of all of these overlapping factors. In 1983, so 2 years after the first cases of AIDS were discovered, Pat Buchanan, who was the leader of White House communications at the time, said about AIDS, quote, "The poor homosexuals, they have declared war on nature, and now nature is exacting an awful retribution," end quote.
Sir.
That is the leader of White House communications at the time. And suddenly, now we're 4 years into the crisis, now infecting thousands, and the administration still wasn't acting on it, which was raising a lot of eyebrows. Victims, like family members were like, hey, couldn't help but notice, there's no bulletin. There's no, like, official, Ronald Reagan's behind a podium talking about this stuff. You were only ever hearing it from, like, the evening news being like, gay men are dying still. Back to you, Steve. And they're like, so, we're lacking, like, when Ebola was a thing in the United States, Obama was talking about it on TV. COVID is a thing, right? It's all anyone is talking about. AIDS, it was like you heard about it through secondhand sources and through, like, weirdly, like, people with microphones on the news being like, he's dying. And he's gay. Back to you in the studio, Chet.
Well, didn't a lot of people perceive it as, like, karma?
Yes.
Basically? Yeah.
Exactly.
And being like, well, you deserve it because of this, and that. Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, the Reagan administration what Ronald Reagan represented and still represents was a return to good old homeboy American values. Like, he is the conservatives' messiah. Ronald Reagan represents, like, the ultimate conservative Christian, pull up by your bootstraps. He was a fucking cowboy actor. He had a cowboy hat on sometimes, and he was just like, well, I'll tell you, Nancy and I are just looking forward to going hunting and loving this great land that God has provided for us. And no one wanted, like, that was the image. And what, are you going to go on the national TV and be like, hey, gay people and poor people are dying, so we have to stop what we're doing and save them? That's bad for your image.
Well, and so many of the things that, like, I feel like this is kind of an obvious take, but, like, so many of the things that a lot of, like, poor people endure, like drug use or sex work, like things like that, like that in itself, so many people viewed as a moral failing.
Yeah, why are we helping these people? They did it to themselves.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's your fault for like doing this and this, and it's like, okay, but like think about what fucking pushed them to like get to that point. Like, have one critical thought in your life. My God,
when will you learn?
Yeah, like.
And like Dr. Donald P. Francis and epidemiologists within the CDC assigned to the AIDS outbreak told the Reagan administration repeatedly, like with any epidemic caused by a fatal infectious agent, cough, cough, you know, this sounds familiar, you need to have early aggressive action. You do nothing and it will just balloon past your control and bleed out past the point of no return. And the CDC actually developed a comprehensive plan in 1985 to help stop the spread of HIV. So we're 4 years in. We finally have like a somewhat stable idea of how to move forward, but the Reagan administration rejected it. And this is my favorite quote. The administration told epidemiologists within the CDC to, quote, look pretty and to do as little as possible. What? Because they couldn't be like, oh, like, no, like, guys, we're working on it.
Yeah.
And then in secret be like, don't work on it.
That's just so crazy. I'm just put this into perspective. Imagine the government waiting 4 fucking years
to mention COVID.
Yeah, to like do something about COVID. What?
We are dead.
What? We were like, they didn't have a vaccine like 3 months in, and we were like, guys, work harder. Like we gotta.
What are we sleeping on?
Literally. Oh my God.
Yeah, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop was explicitly banned by the Reagan administration from addressing the AIDS crisis. And then in 1986, he broke with orders and he did address it on TV. And by now it was a pandemic, which I feel like when I mentioned the pandemic, and I'm going to do so a lot in this episode, we are going to automatically assume of the pandemic in our lifetimes. But pandemic is just a step above epidemic. There's epidemic, then it goes to pandemic. And at this point, it was a pandemic. So when I say pandemic, I'm not talking about COVID. Although, you know, if you want to draw parallels, feel free to do so. But anyway, so General C. Everett Koop did bring up AIDS, even though he was explicitly told not to. And he was dragged through all areas of the administration. He had no political allies. He was essentially blacklisted in D.C., and everyone who worked under this administration was not willing to stand up and say something lest they endanger their own political careers. James Mason was the director of the CDC, and he was actually asked, like, hey, why did the CDC fail to act for so long? Thinking they were going to get, like, a gotcha. He was like, actually, we didn't. And he admitted, he said, quote, there are certain areas which, when the goals of science collide with moral and ethical judgment, science has to take a time out. End quote. They knew that this disease was fatal and that innocent people that they are literally sworn in to protect were dropping dead, and they purposefully blocked support. So action did start to happen in the late 1980s because then, oops, it started to make middle-class white people panic. Like, what if it's on my toilet seats? Oh no, no, it's because it goes through fluids. Like, you cannot get it from coughing, spitting, whatever, but you can get it through, again, like vaginal mucus, blood, and breast milk. And then like babies were born with AIDS, and like, oh, babies didn't do anything. The innocence of babies. They're like, oh, now there's a blood shortage and I can't get the blood that I want. Fun fucking fact, in 1985, the FDA instituted a lifetime ban on blood donation for gay men or men who have sex with men, effectively preventing gay or bisexual men from donating. Also included, if you were a woman and it was like, would you have sex with a bisexual man, and you put yes, they would go, interesting, the door. You are lifetime banned from donating blood. You would fill out a little form and they'd be like, all right. And then you're just blacklisted from donating blood. Do you know when this ban was was lifted?
I'm scared.
August 7th, 2023. 2 months ago. They lifted the 38-year-long ban.
What?
So for almost 4 decades, if you were a gay man, or because they could, are you MSM, men who have sex with men? Yeah. Or would you have sex with MSN? Would you have sex with men who have sex with men? And you hit yes, you were physically barred from legally donating blood lest you have AIDS.
Aren't they? Don't they have to test the blood anyway?
Which is why they got rid of it eventually.
Yeah, like what? Like what? Like you should be testing it anyway. Like why does it? What the fuck? Okay. Interesting. Oh my god, this year, like 2 months ago, literally 2 months ago. That's insane.
Yeah, so the widespread outbreak of HIV/AIDS was not inevitable. It was active obstruction. And like, granted, AIDS is contagious. It is, and it's very contagious, and it is hard to stop when it shows up so late in people. And like, all of that is true, so that didn't help matters. But again, the Reagan administration was told time and again that people are dying, and that the drugs that were available for market were not properly tested for toxicity before being released to market. They didn't have time. They were like, they needed to get a cure, so the closest thing they had was AZT. They just flooded the market with AZT. It was not given the time or the budget to be properly, like, tested.
Yeah.
So people were also dying from AZT, or AZT was 100% effective. And if you got your hands on AZT, it was charged asinine prices.
Yeah.
So the people who needed it, you know, poor people, homeless people, they couldn't even get their hands on AZT even if they wanted to. And that's what people were like, you know, then people kept fighting into the late 1980s and early 1990s, but then people were like, what do you mean? Like, they would go on TV and people would be like, you have AZT. Why are you complaining? We gave you a cure and you're still complaining. And they're like, because your cure is inexpensive and it's not working. Mm-hmm. You're charging like insulin prices for something that is either going to kill me faster or just won't fucking work depending on like extremeness factors. Mm-hmm. That's not good enough. And they're like, the CDC said there's nothing else that they can do. They're like, they don't want to do anything else. The FTC doesn't want to do anything else. Every time that they were brought up, they were like, shut up, don't say anything. Because like you were saying, AIDS was a disease that affected people that America already wanted dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the AIDS pandemic was a monster, and with it came like just a bunch of emotions from the overall public. They were afraid, they were angry, they were defiant, and with AIDS came a general overall condemnation of the LGBTQ community. Like, yeah, the pandemic was seen as a moral failure, that if you got AIDS, you must have deserved it somehow from you being a social degenerate. This wouldn't have happened to you if you hadn't, and it's like, yeah, well, that serves them right for not having unprotected sex. Protected sex is only like, it's still not really a thing today, and we have all these graphics about HIV and whatever. Mm-hmm. You don't see it in porn ever. Like, babe, I don't like wearing condoms, babe. I hate people like, well, if they're unprotected, I mean, how much blame? I'm like, because none of you were having protected sex in the 80s. I don't want to hear it.
You're like, be for real.
Baby boomers. Where do you think you all came from? Just kidding. The generations don't line up. But whatever. And I know it's a stereotype, but typically artists are gay. Gay people love art.
Gay.
You are gay. They love Broadway. They love film. They love writing. Okay, straight people can have photography. They can have that. But usually, creative people tend to be, if not gay, then gay adjacent. And if you're straight and an artist, you're doing hardcore drugs. So you're also at risk for getting AIDS. And you're not wearing a condom if you're a straight artist.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's
so
true.
We're all in this together.
Babe, I have to feel everything in order to channel it into my music.
Unprotected sex is my muse. So with this atmosphere of hate and fear and all these feelings of longing and defiance and anger, so many people turned to creating, to making art. And these weren't just artists or writers or actors, these were activists. They had this ideology that said, like, their art couldn't save lives, like science could, like science wasn't and wouldn't, but art could deliver a message. It could make a statement, you know, it could bring awareness, it could help them express their own personal feelings of loss or longing or helplessness. Because every day they'd wake up and another one of their loved ones is dead. Someone else has a mysterious lesion on their arm that they just discovered this morning. Each day could be your last. And as you keep seeing, like, they saw more and more of their friends dying, it motivated them to keep creating with whatever time they had left.
Yeah. Quick question. Do you know, and I don't know if you're going to address it later, but how accessible was, like, HIV testing?
No, that I'm not entirely sure of, but HIV testing... it seemed like it was up to, government funding. Like if we have so many like free COVID centers because like someone's got to pay for that. And yeah, the pharmaceutical companies were not going to fucking pay for that. They were too busy charging you like $200 for a bottle of AZT in the 80s. So like, you know, inflation, let's, you know, flame that up. Yeah, but as far as testing goes, I mean, I think if I were to assume communal, but there's just only so many tests. And if every day, like,
I can imagine that would be a huge problem.
There are more people that are getting AIDS than there are tests. And the people that are testing can afford to be tested. I doubt that there was a ton of free stuff. Because, again, Reagan wasn't a huge fan on handouts.
No.
Or charities.
You gotta earn your HIV test.
Yeah.
You gotta get to the mines.
The children yearn for the mines. And for me personally, I feel artists that worked through the AIDS crisis hurt me more than, like, say, artists that are going through, I don't know, cancer or other life-threatening diseases. Not that it's any more sad, the way that you die. Your time is cut short, and, you know, that's going to be sad regardless. But the culture surrounding AIDS and what all that it represented to people at the time breaks my heart more. Yeah. Like, today, if you get diagnosed with cancer, you have resources. You have a chance to live. Nobody thinks of it as a moral failing. Nobody uses it as justification to hate you or say that you deserve to die. And that was very much not the case with AIDS. You were shunned. You were hated. The fact that Princess Diana shook the hand of someone with AIDS was front page news because she dared to touch them. And not even hug, shake their hand. Everyone's like, Diana, you broke with protocol. You treated them, you touched them. Like they were lepers. And the cause of it, too, was it's like my own emotional sucker punch. If you were a gay man or a trans woman and you gave into your own sexuality, it was like the world was punishing you for it by potentially giving you a deadly illness. Or if you were a trans person or a gender nonconforming person and the only steady job that you could get was sex work because no one else would hire you looking the way that you did if you didn't pass, it was like you were being punished for being true to yourself.
Well, and like I can't imagine the, like, self-questioning that I feel like would have to be inevitable in a situation like that, where literally everyone is telling you that the way you live your life or the choices that you make are like this huge moral failing, and then you're fucking hit with like the sucker punch of death, and you're just like there's no fucking God, or if there is, like, this is him punishing me, like that just I can't imagine, like, obviously the physical experience of like enduring AIDS, but also I think like the emotional and mental experience of having to like deal with the weight of all of that.
And the guilt too. If you received AIDS and you had a long-term partner, you killed them. It's just a matter of time. Yeah. And it's just like knowing that you've potentially doomed your loved one to a similar fate as you. It's just, ugh, God. And if you died of AIDS, in swoops in your family, who all probably disowned you, either for your sexuality or your gender identity. They come in and they don't recognize your lover as who they are. They don't acknowledge your found family or the community that took you in when they didn't. So they come in, they probably bury you under the wrong name, away from all the people who loved you, and then they all cry out that sin is what did this to you. That if only it wasn't for the community and the circles they raised in, they would never have died of this sinful disease. And that makes me want to bite through concrete. Like, there's a reason why gay marriage was a wanted thing for so long. And it wasn't just because gay people wanted a spring wedding. Like, if something happens to
florals.
You... Right? Oh, my God, the pastel bridesmaids dresses. If something happened to you medically and you've been partners for 10 years, tough. As far as the eyes of the world knew, you might as well have been strangers. You don't get anything of theirs once they die. You're not contacted as next of kin. You might not even be allowed in the hospital room. They're like family only. They're like, oh, I'm their boyfriend. No, you're not. You can sit outside and wait for them to die in the waiting room and hope that they can tell that you're out there because they're hyper-religious conservative families at their deathbed right now, and they don't want to see you. Oh, God. To be an artist and to live in this headspace, I can't even imagine. And so many people turned to art during this time because they felt like they had to make up for that vacuum that AIDS was leaving behind. Like, these people, your community, your loved ones, you, maybe, like, these brilliant and talented people are just dropping dead and nobody is coming to help. Like, what could you do with this incredible injustice of the world but make it so that people could remember them? Like, the greats of your world are dead, so now who else can make their art can dance their dance but you. And yeah, it's this hopeless feeling mixed with like that pseudo-religious iconography, because how much religious trauma did this community have? Could they turn to God at this time? Probably not. When, like, for so many people, God means damnation, and if they were actually believe that they were being punished for being sinful, what good would God do? So they had to like find spirituality and religion in other places outside of this damnation, and they turned that spirituality into like a spiritual attachment to like their partners, to their community, because they had to find that in a place that wasn't immediately being like, well, have fun in hell. Like, and they turned that into like almost like a stubborn refusal to regret their lives or to shrink themselves or make themselves wish that they were anything other than they are. Like they funneled their feelings on death into activism and into making things that would last forever, because they knew that they wouldn't last forever. They took the time that they had left to channel all these feelings into anger, which is why so much art during the AIDS crisis just has this visceral quality. Like, it's raw, it's bitter, it's angry, it's spiritual, it's so much, because they didn't know which day would be their last day. So it has this undercurrent of desperation to it. Is like, there's no time for a redo, there's no time for a rewrite, there's no time for like a revision. It just had to pour out of them while they still had breath in their lungs. So to me, art during this period wasn't just artists going through their own personal tragedies, but it turned into activism. And activism art is meant to disturb, it's meant to offend and make people pay attention. Like, this shit was brutal. It was ugly sometimes. It was harsh. The demonstrations that were performed and the art that was made, the picket signs and the shirts, it was bloody and angry, and it was just so full of rage. Like, the government was letting them die. What were they going to do about it? One of like my favorite little bits is the back of, this is a famous artist too, whose name is escaping me right now because I'm a piece of shit and I can't remember. I think it's John Boscovich. The jacket says, "If I die of AIDS, forget burial, just drop my body off on the steps of the FDA." Shit like that, where you're like,
mic drop.
It's nothing but mic drops, because
Yeah.
they're like, oh,
yeah,
these people are pissed. Yeah, so now I'm just going to go through my favorite pieces of art that came about during this period, or art that centers around this crisis that came later, because this was a generational defining thing. We are still feeling the after effects of the AIDS crisis today. One example is the famous AIDS memorial quilt. Have you heard of this one?
I think I have, but please remind me.
So it's like it's a large quilt. Like sometimes they unfold it on like the White House lawn, and it takes up like a large chunk of the lawn. It's a large quilt containing thousands of panels that commemorate those living with or those who have died of AIDS. And the quilt is composed of panels of different colors, patterns, some dark, some vibrant, and it doesn't tell any narrative other than remembrance. Some panel like commemorates an individual or a group who suffer from AIDS. Some individuals have like several panels, or some of them just have like a first name or like a relationship-based nickname, or they're just anonymous, and the anonymous ones hurt me more.
Yeah.
In June 2006, the quilt commemorated approximately 83,900 names, although the Names Project pointed out that the thousands of names represented less than a quarter of all U.S. AIDS deaths and an even smaller percentage of the total number of AIDS-related deaths worldwide.
Actively banging my head against the microphone. I got goosebumps. Literally.
Those goosebumps are here to stay. I FaceTimed her like a couple days ago, because there's a bit in here that I could not get through without crying. There's just something about gay history makes me want to claw. And this is going to be a slight side tangent, but I'm fucking going to tell you something. Nothing quite grinds my gears more than like little fucking assholes who go to the modern art museums and like point at minimalist paintings or like interactive exhibits and be like, I could do that. I could do that. That's just a blank canvas with some shapes on it. That's trash on the floor. Is this the bench, or is this the fucking modern art? I can make that. I can make. You didn't. It's like, then do it. Could you have? Who cares? You didn't. Someone beat you to it. They're in a museum. You're not. Cry about it.
Yeah.
2.
Damn.
No, I'm pissed. Because I'm like, it's just this weird, like dismissive mentality of like, oh man, if this is all art is, then I could be an artist. Do it. What's stopping you? Your lack of talent?
Is that what it can be?
And two, most of art isn't the art itself, it's the reaction to it.
Yeah.
It is how it makes you feel. It's the experience that it gives. Like, if I walk into an art museum and I see like a fucking ping pong ball on the floor with a little marker card next to it, 10 times out of 10, I will read that marker card. I will cry. Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, look, fucking guys, it's a fucking ping pong ball on the floor. And then you read the description, it's like, the artist's mother was shot in front of them. And this piece symbolizes how small they felt when their mother died and how large and domineering the world felt to them, because the audience looks at the ping pong ball and the perspective from the ping pong ball to you is domineering. And also it's a view of their mother seeing the earth from heaven, but the world is blank because without her there's no light. Yeah, I just came up with that. But most of art is the explanation.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. Anyway. So this next artist is one of those artists. Cuban artist Felix Gonzalez Torres was a gay artist working in America. In sculptures, installations, photographs, and more, Gonzalez Torres mined the look of minimalism to explore how meaning is made and what it means for a person to truly disappear.
Oh, good.
Yeah, if you want goosebumps, this is a really good place to have them. Yeah, throughout his career, he made conceptual work relating to his sexual identity and responding to the difficulties of living with HIV/AIDS. In 1991, his long-term partner, Ross Laycock, died of complications due to AIDS, which inspired him to make some of his most iconic pieces. Pet peeve about this artist, I know he just said that he lost a lover to AIDS, but most of his stuff is untitled, real title in the parentheses, so I'm like... and I get that it's like a choice, but it makes it really hard to go back and look
like
at
reference.
Untitled. I'm like, then it's not, then that's the... But his most iconic piece is Untitled, parentheses, A Portrait of Ross in LA, which was created shortly after his partner's death. And this is an interactive art piece that you've probably seen it. Here's a picture.
Yeah.
Do you know the meaning behind this one?
No.
Okay. So, to describe it, it's just a pile of like individually wrapped candies tucked away in the corner of a museum. And it's exactly 175 pounds of candy that the public is encouraged to take. You can walk up and you can take it, and you can consume it if you want. Like that's the novelty of it, is it's interactive in that way where you can like not only touch it, but you can like eat it. You can touch it. You can take it home with you if you wanted. And the original weight, that 175 pounds, is chosen because that was the body weight of Ross before he started to languish due to AIDS. And it's supposed to mirror the decline of his partner, because the overall weight of the candies in the corner will diminish as people come and take, making them personally complicit in the pile getting smaller and smaller. In the actual notes for this, it's up to the museum or the exhibition or whoever. It's up to them. They could replenish the pile, metaphorically ensuring him perpetual life, or they could let the pile disappear over time until there's nothing. Mm-hmm. In the same year, Gonzalez Torres specified installation parameters for Untitled, parentheses, Perfect Lovers. And this consists of two identical commercial wall clocks displayed side by side so that they are touching, ideally installed above head height where a wall clock would typically hang on the wall. And again, you can be like, he didn't even make those clocks. Like, it's literally supposed to be, like commercially made. Like, you go to the store like right now and get two clocks. Like, what part of this is art? So you bought two clocks from IKEA and you put them side by side on a wall. Like, I could do that. Read the plaque. And it specified that these clocks have to be exactly the same, like dimensions and design. And the clocks are set to the same time initially, although they're probably going to fall out of sync over the course of the exhibition. If one or both of the clocks stop functioning, the clocks are deinstalled and repaired and then reinstalled and reset to the same time. Theoretically, this piece could last forever. And then next to it is a little letter sent to Laycock in 1988, where the artist wrote to him, and he wrote, "Don't be afraid of the clocks. They are our time. The time has been so generous to us. We imprinted time with the sweet taste of victory. We conquered fate by meeting at a certain time in a certain space. We are a product of the time, therefore we give back credit where it is due. Time. We are synchronized. Now, forever. I love you."
Excuse me while I sob.
Yeah, do you want to... Fuck!
Yeah.
So as to what it means, because the artist is like, I don't know, what do you want it to mean? I couldn't pick which meaning hurt more, so I put all of them down from different art critics. So public delivery stated that the two clocks represent two mechanical heartbeats, commenting on personal loss as well as the very temporal nature of life. Some also noted that González Torres' use of a clock, an item that only matters to the living, is a visual metaphor for the crossover between that time and the non-time of the dead, and that time measured represents life itself, and that the piece was a response to the trauma of AIDS and that detached anxiety of death. Art critic Sean Diamond believed the piece depicted two figures always in proximity, but unable to unite and to become a single body, and that they'll never be one. The fabric of their being ensures that eventually they'll end up in conflict.
My eyes twitching.
I was actually able to see one of his pieces in person.
Oh my god.
At an art museum, which was really cool. This is the picture. This was at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. So essentially, it's just like a blank wall, and it's two light bulbs hung up from a string in the middle. And you see this, you're like, that's not art. Like, that's just two light bulbs just dangling with an extension cord on the wall, and there's this little plaque here, and you're like, none of this was sculpted, none of this was created, none of this was. The description reads, because here's the title, Untitled March 5th, because that's Ross's birthday. Here, two factory-made light bulbs shine together to suggest a pair of lovers and one shared point of illumination. Although they glow brightly in unison, one bulb will inevitably burn out before the other, reminding us of the transience of human relationships and the temporality of life. The artist passed away due to complications arising from AIDS in 1996. Yeah! There she goes.
Passing away now.
Do you understand? I was like...
Yeah. It is really interesting, too, because you showed me the image of the installation, and I didn't realize it was two bulbs, because truly, like, the illumination just, like, it's just one light that is coming from this point.
Making me cry.
Like...
Okay, this is the most devastating thing I've ever read in my entire life, and I've read this to you already, but I might choke up again reading it on camera. So, this is like the ultimate, criticism of like modern art, that I could do that. So this art piece is just like a box fan, the fans you can get for like $15 on Amazon.
School gymnasium.
Yeah, it has those little like, ribbons attached to it so you can tell how fast the air is going, and it's encased in like this plexiglass, like, on roller boxes, and it's alone in an empty room, and you just walk in. Before you read the plaque that's next to it, you're like, oh my god, like this entire room is dedicated to this fan. Here's the plaque. The full title, the artist is John Boscovich. The full title is Electric Fan, parentheses, Feel It, Motherfuckers, the only unclaimed item from the Stephen R. Rubino estate from 1997. Yeah, and again, it's an electric fan encased in plexiglass. Soon after the death of his lover, Stephen R. Rubino, from AIDS, Los Angeles conceptual artist Boscovich discovered that Rubino's family had completely cleared out his apartment, including the artist's possessions, save for the electric box fan in this work. An entire person, existence, and relationship had been erased, like so many were during the AIDS crisis. Boscovich encased the fan in plexiglass as a kind of evidence, and added cutouts to allow its circulated air to escape and to be felt by the viewer, almost like an exhalation. In a sense, restoring R. Rubino's breath. At least in memoriam, Boscovich makes a tender and broken-hearted gesture towards some form of eternal life. No, it's not just a fan on the floor. It's not just a fucking light bulb on the wall or some clocks or a pile of candy in the corner. It is art, and I'm crying thinking about it. This man encased this box fan left from this empty apartment that they once both lived in. By the way, his lover just died. Yeah. And he's going to come back to take all of his stuff, and the apartment's already empty because someone just cleared it out without telling you about it. And the only thing, that the family thought was worthless was all you had. So he shrined it. So he gave it up to a museum so that box fan could live forever and be important.
I'm literally gonna cry.
I'm gonna cry on camera. But it's taking these, like, what you can, and trying to make those last forever, and that's where Moving on to the next artist before I cry on the camera. Keith Haring. I feel like that Everyone knows Keith Haring. He will forever be remembered as a very prolific artist who he shirked convention and elitism, and he really wanted to bring art to the people, to the streets, and to make his art free, which is really fucking ironic that every like high fashion brand has a Keith Haring collection where they sell his art on like t-shirts and sneakers for like $1,000.
Yep.
Cough, cough, dickheads. He was known for his very stylized, graffiti-like murals that could be seen across New York in the 1980s. And Haring used his street and commercial art to confront sociopolitical themes. I fucked that word up. Sociopolitical themes, as well as the silencing of discussions around homosexuality and of AIDS. After being diagnosed with AIDS in 1988, Haring used his work to begin campaigning for safe sex and awareness about the illness. In the same year, a group of artists involved in the ACT UP, or AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, grassroots movement, established Grand Fury, an AIDS activist collective. In Haring's famous 1989 poster, "Ignorance equals fear, silence equals death," have been used to promote the message of ACT UP. It's like one of the most famous things that Keith Haring ever did. Silence equals death. Ignorance equals fear. My favorite bit about Keith Haring was one of his final paintings. This is from a Twitter account, Today in LGBTQ+ History. On February 16th, 1990, artist Keith Haring dies of AIDS at the age of 31. Known for designing the National Coming Out Day logo, below is his less-known, unfinished painting, which he intended to serve as a reminder of his own life being cut short by AIDS. So it's a giant canvas. Most of it is left completely blank, and in the corner is this fully made, very vibrant work. It's as usual, like very, how would you describe this? Like, geometric.
It kind of reminds me of those, like, Spanish tiles. There's like just a lot of, there's like his kind of iconic like figures that he does, lots of like geometric patterns. It's very like intricate. Like there's very little within the actual like painting part of it. There's like no white space.
So like this, it wasn't supposed to be like, oh, this is my work in progress and like this is how I make. It's supposed to be like, in this corner is a fully finished piece, and it might have looked really cool, but most of it is blank because I'm never going to be able to finish it.
And it's also dripping.
Yeah, it's dripping with like wet paint or blood potentially.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, haunting shit. Quote from Haring: "These works that I've created are going to stay here forever. There's thousands of real people, not just museums and curators, that have been affected and inspired and taught by the work that I've done. So the work is going to live on long past when I'm going to be here." Oh. Fun fact, Falsettos, the original Falsettos Broadway logo was one of Keith Haring's pieces.
Oh my
which
God.
I did not know until
did not
researching
know that
this.
either.
This was always going to be the way that it was ordered. Segue.
Interesting.
I love it when things work out. So yeah, one of the interesting things, that was kind of the art made like during, the AIDS crisis. Now we're kind of gonna start getting into art that was made like after a lot of the buzz had died down. A lot of like, all right, that was art that was made in the thick of it, right? When people were like fighting and clawing and begging people to like let them live and survive and whatnot. And now that, progress is starting to be made, more and more clinics are opening up, possibilities of survival or, whatever. How did this traumatic event, how are people going to process it? And that's when we're going to start to get into the art made afterwards that kind of center on the AIDS crisis. And Falsettos is my personal favorite one of these things. So the interesting thing about Falsettos the musical, one of my favorite musicals of all time, as I've said, is that it's a Frankenstein stitched together mess of two separate shows. So the composer, William Finn, wrote this one-act musical called March of the Falsettos in October of 1981, so a couple months after the first cases of AIDS were even discovered in the United States, and that itself was based on some of his previously written characters. And then, so he wrote the one-act musical, March of the Falsettos, and then almost a decade after March of the Falsettos, in the wake of the AIDS epidemic, he followed that with Falsetto Land, which is a sequel to March of the Falsettos. And in this one act, AIDS impacts most of the story. And afterwards, like give or take a couple of years, Finn then combined those two one acts into one full-length musical that he just called Falsettos. And as a standalone musical, it makes sense, yeah, but structurally you can tell that it's different act to act. Like, Act 1 is way more character-focused, very little plot happens. It's mostly about exploring the weird dynamics between these characters. And Act 2 is when, like, a plot kicks in, and the story picks up, and there's that feeling of anger, of tragedy, of a call to action. So the creator, Finn, saw the AIDS crisis happening around him, and then looked back at his old work and went, no, I need to say something. And now these characters that previously didn't do this are now, like, begging each other to take a stand, to fight, and that they're screaming at the audience that their love is not a crime, and that time is so precious, and it shouldn't be wasted. And it almost takes aim at its own Act 1 by implying that they need to grow up and just start taking things seriously. Because so the first half of the musical takes place in 1979, before the start of the epidemic, and the second half takes place in 1981, the year the epidemic began, and the year that the first Act 1 was released. So the first act is primarily like a comedy, where AIDS isn't, obviously mentioned or even hinted at, but the second part is a tragedy, because this horrible disease just comes out of left field and just demolishes these characters' lives, which, like, yeah, that's how it went. Mm-hmm. So the creator, he went back and retroactively made falsettos be about the AIDS crisis, where before it was just like an exploration of masculinity and of gay and of Jewish faith and a ton of other things. And he later described falsettos as a catharsis for people who have been going through the AIDS epidemic, as well as for people not going through it, hoping that the show would allow people who had only read about the epidemic to empathize with people who had lived through it firsthand. Mm-hmm. And also in the Act 2, he includes 2 lesbian characters as a tribute to the lesbians who had assisted gay men during the epidemic, which is a whole other forgotten side. Lesbians, in general, statistically, were affected the least. They weren't not affected by AIDS, because, you can still get AIDS through vaginal fluid, but statistically, lesbians were affected the least by AIDS, but they were right on the picket lines. They were side by side in solidarity, especially, if you had a ton of, gay and trans people who were, outed by their families. Lesbians swooped in and were like, we're your family. Mm-hmm. We are your parents. We're your sisters. We're your moms. And that whole side of history tends to be kind of forgotten. So I appreciate that falsettos, like, basically made this tribute to the AIDS epidemic in its Act 2. And one of the most devastating songs in the show is a dialogue between 2 gay men as they sing about how AIDS has impacted their lives. I'm not going to sing it, but I'm going to say it like it's spoken word poetry. All your life, you wanted men, and when you got it up to have them, who knew it could end your life? I left my kid, I left my wife to be with you, to be insulted by such handsome men. Do you regret? I do it again. I'd like to believe that I do it again and again and again. I'm gonna start screaming on camera. And, like, that sentiment, like, all your life you wanted men, and when you finally got it up to have them, who knew it could end your life? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably how they felt. Like, hundreds of thousands of people just let themselves be who they are for the first time, and it's like they were fucking backhanded by the universe, by a cruel and uncaring universe, but they refused to regret it, and they would do it again. Because the initial instinct of what I'm sure the Reaganites wanted was penance. They wanted, like, all of these, gay people to just, like, be on their knees, be like, we were wrong, like, I deserved this, I should never have been gay. And I'm sure some of them did, grief does done a ton of crazy things to people, but it seems like for the most part, no. They were like, I'm going to die with dignity. And, wow, I just gave myself a good, what the fuck? My power. So yeah, I watched falsettos last night, actually.
I have never seen falsettos.
I'm nervous to show people it because I'm afraid that they won't love it. Just because it's basically an opera. It's entirely sung through, and it can drag a little bit. Not a ton of the songs aren't, like, super catchy. It's a lot of, like, you're getting information in song form, and less like, oh my god, it's falsettos, let's, fucking shake ass. Yeah. So I'm afraid to show it to people because I'm like, if they don't like it, I'm gonna be devastated. Mm-hmm. But I actually downloaded a very high definition YouTube. If you have 2.5 hours to kill. Speaking of time, oh yeah, actually in falsettos they take a lot of shots at Ronald Reagan, so it's that I forgot about. So tea. Slay. Me arguing with my mom, like, actually Nancy Reagan liked gay people. No, Heather, she did not. And if she did, too little, too late. Mm-hmm. Speaking of long things, Angels in America. A gay fantasia on national themes. It's a 2-part play by American playwright Tony Kushner, an angel, a legend. The 2 parts of the play, Millennium Approaches and Perestroika, may be presented separately. It's up to them to be like, we're only performing part 1 and part 2 is coming next month. Usually people do it all in one, and it was debuted on Broadway in 1993. The play, it's a play, not a musical. It's a very complex, metaphorical, sometimes symbolic examination of AIDS and homosexuality in the United States in the 1980s. And there are, major and minor characters that are like angels or other supernatural beings or ghosts. In a 1994, playwright and professor of theater studies, John M. Klum, called the play, quote, a turning point in the history of gay drama, the history of American drama, and of American literary culture. Miss, I have to pee every 20 minutes. Angels in America is 3 hours and 30 minutes long when combined on the stage. So strap in and do not drink any fucking fluids. Because
there's no intermission.
No, it's supposed to be, there could be an intermission if they're doing both. But typically, if they want because, have you seen or do you know about Angels in America?
I remember learning about it, in theater, but
they made it a mini series on HBO to make it a little bit more accessible, to be kind of broken down that way. But it's one of the main characters is slowly dying of AIDS, and a lot of it is like him grappling with religion, like we said, and of justice, and he's kind of, as this is happening, I mean, other stories are happening too, it's like an ensemble, but he's going insane. And so you sitting there in this dark room, often a black box theater where you're right on top of these characters, it's supposed to be you're supposed to be transported in it. It's almost supposed to be not interactive, but engaged. Yeah. You are not saying all right guys, intermission, who wants M&Ms?
Come buy our merch.
Yeah, you're supposed to be sucked in it. Yeah. You don't know what time it is. You don't know what time is what. And yeah, again, that complicated relationship with the gay community and with religion, especially when confronted with their own mortality. And everything that Rent thinks it is. Falsettos and Angels in America do it better. I hate Rent. For several reasons. Yeah. Again, watch that Lindsay Ellis video on the subject if you want a deep dive on why I hate Rent. I could go into it, but I don't want to because it's not important to this conversation in large. Also, if you want to hear a lot of repeat information, because I do steal a lot of her info in the beginning about the timeline of AIDS. Whatever. But, again, it being the most famous theater work to discuss AIDS openly, it does deserve a place in the conversation. And it does have those notes that I mentioned earlier about, living life in the moment, to one of the lines is forget, regret, or life is yours to miss. And of this this frustrating, burning need to put your art out there because you don't know if you'll be dead tomorrow. And this pressure to release your magnum opus when you might not have time to make it perfect. And this drive to make you and your loved ones immortal because no one else in the real world cares about you or your plight. And, you and your loved ones are suffering and life is just stupidly short. And it also, acknowledges that not just gay people got AIDS. Roger has, right? Yes, Roger. Yes, Roger has AIDS just because he was, and he's straight, but he used not a sterile needle. And he got it through his girlfriend who slit her wrists in the bathroom. That's how they say it. Because the original Rent is also completely sung through. It's almost an opera, and they released it. It was April gave him a note saying we got AIDS before slitting her wrists in the bathroom. My cousin wasn't in production of Rent, so it's in there. How to Survive a Plague is one of the greatest documentaries ever made. It was super eye-opening, really chilling for me. If you're a fan of documentaries and of getting mad at Ronald Reagan, it's an amazing watch. And I'm starting Pose, which I'm obsessed with. Ryan Murphy, you are on thin ice. Whore. Pose is a TV show about New York City's ballroom scene, which is an African-American, Latino underground, LGBTQ subculture where drag queens formed their own pageants because they were racist in white drag queen pageants, and they would compete within houses with their own found family and community. And AIDS is mentioned in this series, so I can't wait to see how it destroys me. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless paintings, sculptures, exhibits, photographs, movies, films. Some of them are hokey. I'll be honest. You can tell that some of them, like the first couple films, like made for TV, Hallmark films, not Hallmark would never, but made for TV films were made by straight people just being like, oh, but at least they were like the plight of the poor gays. You know, and there's some less than great one like Dallas Buyers Club, but at least it's better than some, you know. But there's just so much amazing art that came from just an incredible amount of pain and feeling abandoned by the people that are supposed to be there to protect you, and relying on the community that is there for you when the people that are supposed to be there for you, like again, the government or your own fucking families, weren't. And art during the AIDS crisis has just such a visceral celebration of gay love and lust and pain. And for me, obviously, it gets me emotional just so you can tell that these people making them, they're dying. They are either dying or their loved one is dead and all their friends are dead. And that attitude is so palpable through their work. But another reason why this is just such an interesting topic to me personally, it's just such an important reminder that we've been here, that gays have been here, and we've always been here. And no matter how much our government would rather we not be here, would rather that we be put on sex offender lists or banned for reading to children while we're in drag, or being trans in public, or refusing kids to be trans in general, we've been here and we will always be here. And I know a lot of, you know, commentators are like, oh, if that's the case, then how come you don't see any old gay people? They've been taken from us. AIDS took out such a large chunk of the population for old queers. We should have thousands more old gay people, but we don't. One of a really impactful picture was like the New York City Gay Men's Choir, like purposefully, some of them wore black t-shirts to commemorate how many of the original choir had died from AIDS, and people in white were survivors, and there was only like 5 people in the whole choir, and you could just tell how much dark and empty space there was. And instead of them being here, we just have their art that they made to remember them by, which is why I think it's so important to bring it up whenever I can, because that's like my own very tiny small part in keeping them alive and keeping them relevant, is reminding the world of like all of these incredible people that were just taken from us because someone decided that they should die, and they should die alone. And that's not right. Anyway, that's it. I'm gonna cry again. But yeah, emotional topics nonetheless. Final thoughts from the peanut gallery.
My thoughts are just thank you yet again for educating, for putting together such a thoughtful and yet also like concise and digestible, I guess like speech on this. I think you're so right. I think this is such an, you know, important topic. And I mean, clearly like, yeah, like I've seen Rent, like I've heard of Angels in America. Like I, you know, acknowledged at the beginning of this that like, unfortunately I'm not the most educated person like on the AIDS crisis and all of the history surrounding it. So I'm always very thankful to learn and thankful for your wisdom and your research capabilities.
Try again.
I can't help but laugh at the juxtaposition between our episodes. Yeah, if you listen to the episode before this, I'm like, we're gonna go through silly little reality TV shows that are stupid.
It can't just be sad. Like it. And
but yours are always so like insightful and educational, and I'm like, what's happening on Reddit?
But honestly, I'm gonna say something. Like, and I know I said a little bit earlier about, you know, the state of the world and how I always just assume that everything is falling apart at any given moment. But if we get wrapped up and consumed in hatred, and what it makes me want to do is do nothing. I mean, I always found it really inspiring, again, that I've just, you know, ranted about for like almost an hour, that these people didn't do that these artists were like, fuck it, if I only have a week left to live, I'm gonna like make my magnum opus while I still can and create, and, you know, maybe leave it unfinished, but it's mine, and I left it behind. But my instinct when things seem too much and I feel like the world is ending and not worth it is to just curl up in a ball. Mm-hmm. So reminding of the silly. I feel like being silly is genuinely one of the pleasures of life.
It is.
And if, you know, Bravo, you tricky bitch, the channel that, honestly, the announcer voice for Bravo is so nostalgic. It's like, up next on Bravo. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, what's up? Like, I will enjoy campy, trashy, gay TV, actually, because they couldn't. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to absorb it for them.
We're going to watch Boy Meets Boy right after
and I'm going to scream. Oh my god, how many of them you think like overplucked their eyebrows to make it more convincing in the early 2000s that they were... Bravo was also the one that brought us the original Queer Eye for the straight guy, so I don't... Bravo was like, actually there is a binary. You are either fabulous and essentially a woman, or you are a dumb, stupid, straight man.
Uggo.
Bisexual people don't exist.
No.
Who wrote this? Ryan Murphy? Bring it all the way back to Dix the musical. Yeah. Nathan Lane being like, I'm a gay man who sometimes has sex with women. What? Now I've heard everything.
Guys, it's so good. I encourage you, if you're the
weirdo in your group.
Yeah, if you're the target audience for Dix, please go see it. Please.
If you're not, don't.
Yeah,
because I don't want to hear your thoughts about why gay people actually maybe don't deserve gay marriage, and maybe the Westboro Baptist Church has a point. If you're like a sensitive, like Steven Universe gay, maybe this one just isn't for you. But if you like South Park at all, give it a little watch. And if not, you know what? The second that the twins start to look at each other in a sexual light right in the eyes, you can leave.
You can leave the theater, and that is
it's gonna get worse.
And it only gets worse. In fact, your mouth will be agape the entire third act of the film.
My eyes were closed, actually, and that's not an exaggeration. I just heard the slick sounds. I didn't actually... I closed my eyes, and I was like, I do not see...
I cannot see,
and that's my right. Honest, you know what? Watch Dix, because it will make Ronald Reagan turn in his grave. Ronald Reagan's grave
he was afraid of.
Is a gender-neutral bathroom.
And you heard it here, folks. Actually, no, but
I did not come up with that, but
that's been said. But we are
endorsing it.
Yeah, we are
Go
publicly
piss.
endorsing.
Go piss, girl.
Go piss, girl, on Ronald Reagan's grave.
I want that on a t-shirt.
Just as our ancestors would have wanted. Thank you all so much for listening. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you so much again to our lovely Skyler for bringing this episode to us. We do not deserve your wisdom. Yeah, thank you guys. Bye.